the costs?
Well, the benefits are long, especially if you're at the public health sector of this outbreak. You're talking about children, and most parents can tell you under the best of circumstances, schools can be kind of a petri dish of children bringing home infections, colds, these sorts of things. And when you have children who are, so far we haven't seen a lot of the coronavirus outbreak among the younger set, they can be carriers. And you have a lot of children who are being cared for after school by people who are seniors who may be most at risk. So the benefits from the health perspective of this particular crisis is pretty clear to see. That being said, if you're a parent, it's a headache because if you have to work and find some daycare for your child, that's now out the window. You're probably likely to be teleworking from home. And as one of the people said in the earlier package, telework not only means focusing on your job, but when school is out, you also have to make sure your children are either entertained or otherwise occupied and not getting into trouble while you're busy talking to the office. So on that perspective, it's kind of a mixed signal, especially when everybody's going to be cooped up in the house together.
And I imagine if this puts an extra burden on parents or even grandparents who are in the home, if they're more run down, that could, for example, compromise their immune systems. There might be a health consequence to this decision.
Well, for every action so far that has happened in this crisis, there's been an equal and opposite reaction. So yes, you're absolutely correct. While grandparents and aunts and uncles and older people may be able to help out with the children, they are at more risk, they are more vulnerable judged on what we know at this point about the virus. The other kind of tricky thing is we really don't know that much about the virus at this point, relatively speaking. There have been small reports that children are in fact becoming vulnerable, and as any epidemiologist would be able to tell you, the longer a virus is allowed to roam through a system and through people and shared from one person to the next, it has a tendency to mutate. So we don't know what's over the horizon, so it's best to take all precautions that we can while we know what's in front of us at this moment.
We saw many universities booting students from their dormitories. Is letting everyone leave at once, parents picking them up and whatnot, is that not what you'd want to avoid?
It sure seems like it's something that you would want to avoid, but a lot of healthcare people in the public sector are asking, what alternative do we have? We have to choose from the best of some really bad options here. The option one would be to require or allowing children, older adults rather, to stay in their dormitories, to stay on campus and have a virus outbreak that we don't really know where it's headed. But by bringing them all home at once, you have a situation like you would have at Chicago O'Hare Airport over the weekend, where a vast amount of people trying to get through a small space, they're all in the same area, they're all sharing the same air, they're in close contact with one another, which is expressly what the epidemiologists and what people at the CDC are saying is the hugest risk for having this virus accelerate and for increasing the curve of new infections and possible fatalities with this thing.
Some have looked back to the flu from 1918 to see how different communities reacted and what were the results. Are we seeing some communities better prepared or reacting better for this than others?
Well, I think the one big difference between then and now is technology. In 1919, we kind of were spreading information by telegraph and by courier and by letter. So it was much more difficult to get ahead of the curve and prepare back then than it is now. Plus, medical science is much better now than it was then. But conversely, the problem here in preparation is, although we have instantaneous communication and are able to talk to people about what's coming, a lot of those warnings weren't heeded right away. Not to mention the fact, even if the warnings were heeded, we don't know how quickly this virus is spreading from one person to the next, especially in an era of global travel and globalization. What happens on one side of the planet is now connected to what happens on the other. So preparation and vigilance is always important. We seem to have been caught flat-footed in a number of places because we haven't had to deal with such a pandemic on a wide scale. And a lot of the early alarm systems that were in place and that were installed after pandemics like the 1919 flu either had been dismantled or muted or really not taken as seriously as they needed to be, given the fact that this thing was on the horizon and now it's is having an impact not only on public health and on education, but also on the economy writ large and we are looking at some very serious consequences for lack of leadership and lack of preparedness.
All right.